Welcome to Speak from the Body, a podcast that seeks to explore the wealth of wisdom of the body. My name is Avni Trivedi, and I'm your host, as well as an osteopath, doula, and movement teacher. In this podcast, I speak to experts about all sorts of topics to do with the body, such as touch, trauma, body confidence, gratitude, birth, movement, relaxation, and baby development. My wish is that you learn how to connect with, listen to, and respect your body. Today's episode is with Catherine Lightfoot. Catherine holds a BA in psychology with a focus on child development and is a certified professional midwife with the North American Registry of Midwives. She's also studied yoga and personal spiritual development at a small spiritual school in southern India. Catherine believes that birth is a sacred passage for an emerging conscious being, and mutual respect for all involved is a basic human right. She's most passionate about unveiling awareness of prenatal and perinatal consciousness, because peace on earth begins before birth. This is the focus of her sacred work called the 4 Baskets. 4 Baskets refers to the timeframes of conception, gestation, birth, and the first hours after birth. This is the primary foundation for our lives. All of our experiences in the 4 baskets create the lens through which we perceive the rest of our lives. Bringing awareness to your 4 baskets is a vital step in birthing your own authentic self and being the change we wish to see in the world. Catherine homesteads in the Missouri heartland with her supportive family and can often be found walking barefoot in the creek. I'd like to welcome Catherine to the podcast. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for being here today.
Hi there. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm so excited to talk about 4 Baskets because I came across your lecture at APA, which I've been following a lot of APA's work for a long time. And I wanted to start by asking, how did you get into the kind of consciousness of preconception and pregnancy care?
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly, it was while I was doing some spiritual work in India. I was studying at a small spiritual ashram and just doing my own personal work. I was a yoga instructor at that time and so felt very drawn to the aspects of yoga and Ayurveda, and wanted to experience it firsthand from authentic teachers. And so I dove in, and interestingly, along my own spiritual journey, I was taken through my own birth. So I experienced my rebirth, my birth the way it was, which had tremendous impacts for me, just seeing what happened and how it had impacted me, and experienced almost instantaneous healing from things that had imprinted and impacted my entire life from my prenatal period, and then was able to rebirth how I wanted to. And this was all a process that was just led internally by my personal divine connection. I don't know how deep you want to go into that, but that's a general overview.
And were you already a midwife at that point, or was this before you became a midwife?
It was before I became a midwife. So that was the beginning of my passion and my calling to do this work. And so I actually came home from India the first time after that experience. And I remember writing very clearly in my journal, like this huge, big one line on a page that says, I'm going to become a midwife. I was doing some doula work at that time. So I was in the birth, related field. I was doing yoga and doula work, and just knew that I was being called to work on a bigger stage. So I started my midwifery studies at that point and became a midwife.
And when you practiced as a midwife, did it feel that you got to incorporate the spiritual aspect?
Yes, I studied as a home birth midwife. So I took the more traditional route to midwifery. And so I did an apprenticeship with self-study that led to a certification with NARM, the North American Registry of Midwives. And being a home birth midwife, where I work with people in their homes. I don't have an office or a clinical practice at all. That tends to draw in the people who are ready for this type of work, who are ready to recognize that birth is a sacred event, and the consciousness of babies, whether they were aware of it really in those terms or not, they were ready. Honestly, I feel like every woman who's been pregnant recognizes the sentience of the baby that they're carrying. We feel that awareness inside of us and that alertness of the being that we're carrying, whether we're aware of the implications of that or not. That basic understanding is there. So I was meeting people and being drawn to work with families that were so ready. And so I would just start beginning to talk about the work as it was presented to me, which is called the 4 baskets, which is a way of discussing this time frame of consciousness from conception through gestation, birth, and the first 6 hours after birth.
And why 4 baskets? What's the relevance of the word basket?
Only as that it's a container. So I'll give a little bit more background to that. After my experience that I had personally in India during this spiritual work and meditation, I sought out one of the guides there at the ashram for reflection about what it was that I experienced, because it wasn't necessarily something that the group was being guided into. It was just a personal thing that I experienced with my own birth. And so I went to him, and there were several different guides, because it's many countries of people all over the world that participate at the same time. And so there was a North American guide who I was assigned to, and I went to him, and the word in India for that is dasa, D-A-S-A. And so his name is Dasa Doug. And I went to Dasa Doug and said, here's what I just experienced. I just got taken back through my own birth. I saw how it affected my life. What on earth is this? He said, yes. This is called the 4 baskets. And so that's how I came to understand the conceptual awareness from the ancient Vedic perspective, which in this ashram they call the 4 baskets, because they found it helpful to have a little container to hold in order to view our experiences. So the first basket is the container that holds the time frame of our conception, which really is from preconception all the way up to the moment that we consider conception, the moment where egg and sperm unite. In this Vedic perspective, it's really from the very first thought of the child and the connection between the parents, the future parents and the child, whether that awareness is there or not, and up until the end of the embryological period, so about 8 weeks of gestation. So that's all considered the first basket. The second basket is the container that holds everything from after embryological development, so after about 8 weeks, until the end of pregnancy, or right before the birth. So the rest of gestation is being held here in that container. The experiences of the third basket are being held by the third basket are the experiences of the birth journey. And then, so that is everything from the very beginning of how labor begins. So the moment right before the baby emerges. And then the fourth basket is the container that holds the experiences of the moment of emergence of the child through about 6 hours. We have this time frame of 6 hours after birth because it's said to be that the child is super conscious in that time frame, that we are made to be born with this super awareness of being able to perceive everything in our world and in our environment that we're being born into. So the first 6 hours, this child is knowing that you've got this heightened awareness and that they're perceiving everything that's happening around them. It's so important so that we can learn to honor that time frame. And so that's the 4 baskets given as an overview of what the containers hold. And you can see that even though they all have a different time frame, the conception time frame is very different from this kind of 8 or 9 months gestation time frame, which is different from birth, which can be anywhere from a few hours to a few days. And we've got just 6 hours, but they're each given equal weight. So they're very, very important all together, but also in their own respects.
I have so many questions to ask.
Great, I'm so glad.
I mean, one big part is the preconception aspect, because I mean, say where I work in London, where a woman who's pregnant might see someone different at every antenatal appointment, there's not even really the consciousness in the pregnancy in the way that things are supported. So, maybe she's getting that within a yoga class or with hands-on treatment or other things, but it's not across the board, which it should be, in my opinion. And I've had experiences often as a practitioner where I've sensed the baby way before before the woman's pregnant. And I think by working in proximity with women through this time, it's often, there's often a sensitivity that comes up. So, but yeah, I'd love to know more, like, how early is it considered to be preconception?
As far as the 4 baskets concerned, it's very vague and it's very independent of that individual soul's choice to come in. I've heard stories of women who have been communicating with their children for years before they actually conceive. So that all of that time frame would be considered in that first basket. And some they're, completely unaware. But it's really about the 4 baskets is very independent of the baby or the spirit or the soul's choices. And it's something that we don't often recognize in our modern culture, is that is how it begins. An interesting story that kind of relates to this is we didn't realize until very recently, and I say we loosely, and it means Western medical culture, did not necessarily realize that birth begins with the baby, a message that's sent from the baby. And so this whole idea of science in general was very confused about why some women would start labor at, whatever weeks, and some didn't start for another time. And they had no clue why labor was even initiated. And now we're beginning to get hints that it is a protein that's released from the baby's body when the lungs are fully matured that initiates the process. And so if we use that as kind of a guideline and realize actually the entire time, all of these decisions are being made from the baby, from that soul's perspective, including when the first basket begins. So it's kind of a vague, I know that's not a clear answer, but.
And I'm also curious, considering now there's so much more fertility treatment and technology and advances, and the Vedic view is a very ancient, still very relevant, but ancient wisdom, what your thoughts are on situations where, say, there might be conception with a donor egg or donor sperm or both, or surrogacy, or, so there's many more complexities than just 2 parents.
Yes, what a big question. There's just so much that we don't know. That when the medical world begins to intervene in these very sacred and natural processes, there are outcomes, there are effects. We don't always get to know what they are, ever. Sometimes, but sometimes we find out years and years later, decades later, what those effects have been. And so quite honestly, ART, artificial reproductive technologies, are fairly new in the world, and we don't know all of the effects. We can surmise what those might be. We can try to bring awareness to the fact that there are effects on the consciousness of the soul and the baby from those techniques. And there are ways that we can mitigate that. So I'm not for or against artificial reproductive technologies. And I know that they've been just amazing, miraculous events for some women and some families. But I think it's important that we're aware that there is an effect, and bringing our consciousness and our awareness to that can do wonders in helping make sure that it's not a traumatic effect. So acknowledging, and that's what the work that, that I do with the 4 baskets is really all about awareness. I like to say it's our first step and our last step in this process, and because it's really the only thing that we can do is expand our awareness. And so for me, I can just say, although I've been doing this work for years, my awareness is still expanding. I'm continually expanding my awareness of my own personal processes. And so that's where I like to guide people back, is to their own primary period or their own 4 baskets time frame. Because if each one of us starts with our expanding awareness there, it ripples out. And so let's say a woman is considering IVF or surrogacy or adoption, even these things that have special circumstances towards the beginning of the baskets of this child that they're calling into the world. And if she does work with her 4 baskets, it will affect and ripple out and heal and create light and space for her child's 4 baskets. So that's really my only advice that I have at this point in time for anyone, anywhere, whether they're considering natural conception or any other type, is to go back and dive into your 4 baskets. What was your story of your beginning, and how has it affected your life?
That makes so much sense, because unlike couples or single people that adopt, there isn't that requirement for people to look at their own kind of origins and everything, which just, it doesn't make sense not to look at those early years when they're so impactful. So that's just such a clear model with the 4 baskets.
We haven't always, our culture hasn't always recognized that it's all connected. And so when we start to realize, actually, the way I was born is going to affect my birth. And quite honestly, my birth, if I'm going to be the midwife, my birth and the way I was born and the way I view birth and my experiences is going to affect a birth that I attend. And so really we are all connected in so many ways. And so when we can the more we get more expanded awareness around those connections, we can begin to relate on a deeper level.
And what would you say in situations like, say, for the first basket, if it's around the 8-week mark, some women might not know that they're pregnant at that point, and they might have been doing all sorts of things that they wouldn't be doing if they knew they were pregnant. Or in the other baskets, a woman who's very stressed in her pregnancy, or someone who has a really difficult birth or can't breastfeed. Or how do you deal with those kind of challenges when sometimes information and knowledge can be counterproductive because it can be things to feel bad about or feel guilty about?
Good question. And this is one that I get a lot. And I sense from a lot of birth keepers and women and people in this field, a hesitancy around even broaching the subject with pregnant women of this consciousness and these effects of this time frame, because of a need of sensitivity. And so I honor that, because they're saying, I want to be sensitive to this period. And I think that's a wonderful thing. However, I think it can also be a harmful thing, because it keeps this awareness under a veil. And this awareness has been veiled. This consciousness of the baby has been veiled for too long. So the way that I approach this question is, these things that we're afraid of affecting us, or like the pregnant mother or the baby, are already there and affecting them. So by bringing awareness to it, it's only going to help. And so it's not necessarily going to cause more stress or more harmful effects, because whatever is underneath there, the experiences that we're worried about shining the light on, are already there affecting, whether we're aware of it or not. And so I try to help alleviate some of that worry of talking about these things with pregnant women, because In my view, it's only helpful to shine light on it. And so we can also be sensitive as we do that and just let them know, because here's the bottom line. We are so flexible plastic beings. There's nothing that's set in stone. So oftentimes we call these experiences imprints in the PPN field. You won't hear me use that word very often. I usually just say experiences, because the word imprint makes it feel almost like it's embedded in there and there's nothing we can do about it. And on one hand, that is true. It's there and it's always going to be there, but there is something we can do about it. And so just by bringing our awareness to it, it actually lightens and lessens its burden if it's a traumatic event or a stressful event that happened there. So it's often like you might have more of awareness like this. A lot of birth keepers know how the impact of a fear in birth, if a woman is feeling fearful, how that can impact a birth. But just like when we tell a woman, seeing it or saying it, by seeing or saying our fear, it actually won't have as much impact on us. It's when it's kept in the dark, quiet corner that it can really begin to rear its ugly head in birth and in our life. And that's the same way with the 4 baskets. So oftentimes people are afraid, and you might remember this from my presentation. I know I showed some pictures about this. I feel like so many times people are afraid they're going to find this ugly, fearful thing like a snake, when they peer into their baskets, and they just would rather not know that it's there. But really what we find is our inner child and our inner beauty and our inner wholeness. And that's always what's there. And so often I like to use the picture, this image of this little tiny baby kitten peering up at you from the inside of a basket. Because really, when you start to peer in, that's what you're going to see. And so you can get an image right now in your mind's eye of this sweetest little kitten with these big doe eyes looking up at you. And unless you have an issue with cats, most of us would probably just want to sweep it up and bring it to our breast and hold it and cuddle it and give it love. And that's the effect that most people have when they look into their 4 baskets, is this feeling, this overwhelming. Oftentimes I call the 4 baskets the birth of compassion, because it's sometimes people's first experience of really being able to feel that overwhelming sense of heart openness and compassion towards themselves.
I'm just reflecting on how different the world could be if people could stay with open hearts rather than have to get in defensive mode. Like sometimes when I'm treating babies osteopathically, they're starting off in their really early days in quite defensive postures. And it's just like something needs to be different so they're not having to be in that place.
And we build those walls and those defenses because if you can picture yourself as that tiny little creature, vulnerable, and now something's happening, so you're scared, it's a protective mechanism. We actually, as humans, we're incredibly resilient. We as a species are incredibly hardy because we have these mechanisms that allow us to dissociate and to continue to survive, even though something incredibly traumatic or scary is happening or has happened to us. And we can see, in other creatures that just like a butterfly in a cocoon. And if we go and start poking around like we do to our babies in the womb, where we might poke a needle in to do a test or draw blood and amniotic fluid out, or use these really loud ultrasound Doppler machines to take a picture or see what's going on inside. That's really like messing with that butterfly in the cocoon. With a butterfly, however, if you mess with it too much, it will not hatch. Or if it does, it's not going to be able to fly, which means it will die very quickly. But obviously, our babies are incredibly resilient and able to handle all of that. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying if we weren't necessarily so hardy of a species, we wouldn't be able to get away with doing all that we do to our babies in the womb. I'm also thinking of chickens. I homestead here in the United States. I live in the heartland, in the state called Missouri. And it's a very rural kind of farmland. And we have a homestead and we raise chickens and other things and grow our own food. And the very first time I was incubating chicken eggs instead of just purchasing chickens, as a birth keeper, I was very fascinated by the whole process. And I was reading a lot and researching about these chicken eggs and what I can do to help. And all the literature says, don't do anything. Leave it alone. Let nature take its course. And these are not conscious websites or books. This is just very, very basic farming. And I could not believe the wisdom that was maintained there that did not somehow translate to human birth, which I so badly wanted to kind of bring those two together and overlap them and show the disparity. Where for a chicken egg, it's almost handled more sacredly. Definitely the natural process is being honored and saying, leave it alone. Don't touch it. Don't mess with it. Nature will do her best. But in birth, we don't have necessarily that same awareness and that same schedule. We're being told that it's okay to poke and prod and do all of these different things, and that nature maybe doesn't have it all figured out, that we have to give shots, take blood pressures, and do all of these different things because nature somehow is flawed, is the message that in Western medicine we're getting. But anyway.
What does a pregnancy look like if you're tending to the full baskets?
Well, gosh, it could look like any different thing for any different person. For me, it's not a recipe or a prescription for a way of being or a way of treating or handling pregnancy. It really is simply the awareness. And so each individual person who becomes aware of their own four baskets, because that's where we start. Anybody I work with, I'm always bringing them back to their four baskets. And so even if I'm working with a pregnant woman, we're talking about her four baskets. She was in the womb. Of course, that ripples out and has influence over now she's carrying in a large part of the environment of the four baskets of her child. But she gets to decide what that looks like. I do often encourage people to communicate with their child because the child is the one who's making the choices and decisions and may have influences and may have things that they want their four baskets to be. And I think that is where, if I were to direct anybody, I would just say, what does your child want about that? What does your baby think?
What ways do you recommend that they communicate with their child?
Honestly, it's very within themselves. That's the gateway or the portal for being able to connect with a baby. So I do share, just general breathing practices, grounding and centering meditations. I really like the heart math, the simplicity of the heart math technique, which helps, people connect to their own heart rhythms and the earth's heart rhythms. And when we're in that space, it's in heart math, they call it coherence. You enter into the coherent field of awareness. It's so easy to communicate with other people, especially the baby that's within you, because you're sharing blood and oxygen and food and nutrients. I mean, you're sharing absolutely everything with that child. And so, our thoughts are being shared as well. And it's a two-way communication. Just by bringing our awareness to it, we can harness that ability.
So the third basket is birth, you were saying, and you mentioned about how the baby initiates birth. And obviously so many births nowadays where there's a high rate of induction or elective cesarean section, that's not the case. So I'd love to explore kind of, I don't know how to, there's a time and a place for certain interventions, but how someone can navigate that with awareness.
Mm-hmm. So let's say, and this is probably the second most asked question that I get, is people, we are very concerned once we have this awareness of this time frame that I call the four baskets and how it affects, it is the foundation for that child's life. And so everything they experience in the four baskets is now becoming the lens through which they perceive the rest of their entire life. And so when we get that, when we embody that wisdom, as women especially, we become very concerned about, oh my goodness, well, what happened because my, second birth was induced, and, all of these different things. And so I kind of have two different ways I would like to talk about this. So there is the healing work that we can do after the fact. So a lot of people who come to this work are concerned about the births that they've already had. And so once again, my very first recommendation is, let's look at your forebasket, because it will ripple out and affect the births that you've also given birth to, the children you've given birth to. And then on the other hand, there would be, let's say, a pregnant woman that I'm working with or that's listening to this right now who's saying, oh my goodness, my doctor has told me that I might need to be induced by a certain time frame if I don't go into birth. So, or for any of the number of reasons, I need to be induced because of a legitimate health issue. Okay. So again, both of those respects, I would say, let's look at your own forebaskets. Very often, and let me share a story. Very often when a woman is dealing with something in her current birth, let's say she's pregnant, getting ready to give birth, and an issue is coming up. So often it's relating to the way she was born or the way her mother gave birth or the way her mother was born. Our cellular memory begins when we are in the womb of our grandmother. So what that means is, as an egg, the part of me that is an egg, that was an egg before I became who I am, before conception, was growing in my mother's body when she was a baby in her mother's womb. So my cellular life began in my grandmother's womb. So we are connected in this way, cellularly. The experiences of our grandmothers giving birth are affecting our cells. The experiences of our mothers giving birth affected us as well. And so these experiences are affecting the way that we're giving birth. And so I always go back to there. There's that ancestral connection. I call it the red thread that connects us as women. And often by bringing awareness to that, the woman now can develop a sense of power and knowing. And all of a sudden she knows exactly what she's to do in this birth. So there's that aspect about the actual, the lineage and what's affecting our births. But that's none of this is to say that she should never have an intervention, or just because her mother had a C-section, that's affecting her birth and she should not have a C-section. It may mean that, it may not mean that. It may mean, this birth might need to be born with an intervention for whatever reason. And so I think that's where the gist of your question was. And so by seeing that, once we've done our awarenesses, our journeys of our four baskets, seeing all the threads and the connections that brought us up to this moment, we're in the place of this really compassionate or heart-centered awareness that we can communicate effectively with our child. And so in this, what we call prenatal bonding, when we've developed a sufficient bond with our child, which is a two-way communication. So it's not just talking to the baby. We call it talking with the baby, which means we're also receiving information from the child. But having that open communication and explanation of what's happening or what might be needed is all that the child might need. That open awareness and communication can be the thing, the bridge that changes it from a traumatic experience to a resourceful experience where a child then might, and none of these things, we can point to different events and say, oh, if a person experiences X, Y, and Z, then it might affect them this way, or we see it causes this later in life. But really, just like us now as adults, each one of us experiences things very differently, and the way that we perceive the world and the way that impacts us is very different. two people might have the very same experience of, standing on the side of a street and seeing a car accident and internalize it completely differently. And so babies also can perceive and experience things very differently. So when we have an open communication with the child, that can be the one thing that helps them actually make whatever's happening that you're afraid of being a traumatic experience a very beautiful experience.
When you're working with people with the 4 baskets, are you typically working with both in a couple, or do you tend to be working more with the mother?
I've done it both ways. It really is depending on the family dynamics and the couple dynamics and how they work with each other and how they show up for this birth and for me. But if I have the chance of working, with a partner dynamic, it's pretty amazing. And the father has an impact as well. So again, him looking at his 4 baskets is really powerful and very effective and allows him to show up in a way that is very impactful for this child.
Makes so much sense. And there's still, even in this day and age, so much exclusion of the father's experience, isn't there, really? And I've had so many times when I've been doulaing of dads that have really found it difficult to be in the birthing room, where it's just felt like it's something from before, rather than just a fear of birth in general.
And I think that's okay. I honor wherever they are. I don't think it's important that the father must be, the most engaged and present. Really, it is very important that the birthing person, the woman or the birthing mother, is the primary source of the environment for the child. The next layer of support then is her partner. And so, of course, we'd love to nurture that, but it's important also, just like it wouldn't be relevant to force this information on a pregnant woman who's not ready to hear it. It's the same with the father. And so many times I think we put so much pressure on our dads, especially when you think about it, men have not been in the birthing world for so many generations upon generations. And now all of a sudden it's like, the world is requiring them to somehow have this knowledge and to show up. And so many of them do. And I'm blown away every day when I see the way that these men are showing up in birth. Because I realize, I'm like, it's not in there. Like, I've got this red thread that connects me to birthing women who birthed in power. My family, my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, they birthed, naturally and in their own power. And I have that to pull on. And I see, like, my husband, who was able to show up at our birth, just be this really amazing presence. And I'm like, it's not even in your blood. Like, it's not in your bones and your DNA. How did you do that? So I want to honor the men who do show up in that way and just recognize what an honor it is, have them when they are fully present, but also honor the men who may not be ready. I think it's okay.
And it's interesting to hear about the 4th basket being 6 hours, because when I did my doula training, there was this talk of the golden hour post-birth, and it would always be really sad if I was attending a birth where postnatally there was just so much going on in the room in those immediate hours, and so many people walking in and out and doing things and noise, and and how common it is in a hospital setting not to have that peaceful golden hour. But I'd love to understand more of the significance of the 6 hours. And
so I asked these questions too when I was in India, especially the second time. I went back to India a year and a half after my first visit. And my goal was to really get some more answers to these 4 baskets questions. And so I picked the brains of as many dasas as I could. And honestly, they don't know. They're like, oh, it's just innovative wisdom. So I don't have any clear answers about 6 hours, except they said that's the time frame that the child's awareness is heightened. So it's important to recognize that we have this heightened awareness for 6 hours. And then we settle into kind of a more normal consciousness of an awareness. What the heightened awareness in the first 6 hours means is that they're also able to pick up the thoughts of everyone present in their birth. So not just the words or what they're seeing and hearing, but literally knowing the thoughts of everyone present in the room. And so I think it's very important. The reason I think that, and I'm so glad that we're starting to honor the sacred hour, as Dr. Raylene Phillips, the president of APA, has coined it. And that first sacred hour is really important. But to me, it's like that's us trying to do our best. Like that's what we might be able to get away with. It's kind of like when we talk about optimal cord clamping to get away from immediate cord clamping. Hospitals are saying, okay, we'll give you 3 minutes, or maybe 5 minutes. And it's like, okay, if that's what you can get away with, that's great. So much better than immediate cord clamping. Although physiological birth that allows the placenta to be born before the cord is ever cut, which could be a half an hour, that would be optimal. So to me, it's kind of like that. I think we're honoring this first hour, which is amazing and wonderful. Let's start moving towards even a better process of the full 6 hours. I think that'd be optimal.
And when you were in India and exploring the 4 baskets, did you have much insight into the postnatal period and the 4th trimester and how to honor that period of time?
Yeah. So in India, we talk about the primary foundation was the 4 baskets that goes all the way up to 6 hours after birth. From 6 hours after birth through 6 years of life is the secondary foundation. We have primary foundation, and then there's another layer on top, which is the secondary foundation. So from that 6 hour time frame ish, through the early part of the child's childhood, all of those experiences are also very important. And so, but you might be asking about is more like the 40 days. And so, in India, oftentimes it's a 40-day period of postpartum healing that connects the mother and the baby more. It's important that we have this prenatal bond. And then it's important that we have this attachment at birth, after birth. And the longer that we can allow that, the mother and the child to stay in the secondary womb of being together, the better, in my view. Yeah.
And am I right in thinking that if, like, the earlier that bonding is initiated, like if it's initiated quite early in pregnancy, that it improves the outcomes for the birth and like the mental health of the mother postpartum? And there's so many other, it's not just it's a nice thing for a mother and her baby to be bonded. It's physiologically has so many benefits, doesn't it?
Yes. And in our APA's summit that we just finished in March, Birth Psychology Month is marked every year for our organization. And we just came off of this amazing summit, and the theme this year was prenatal bonding. And so I actually learned so much from the experts about prenatal bonding, even just myself in this time frame, this month that we came off of. And there were studies that people shared with us that showed the decreased amount of postpartum depression with prenatal bonding that begins early in pregnancy, increased rates of breastfeeding, less chances of cesarean section. I mean, just like, and not even just like by small amounts, incredible results that we're seeing with prenatal bonding.
And for anyone who hasn't come across APA, would you talk about what APA is and what it stands for?
Yes. Oh, I would love to. So APA, we keep referring to it by its acronym. It stands for the Association for Prenatal and Perinatal Psychology and Health. So that's the long title for our organization. And we're about a 40-year organization, which was birthed back with Thomas Verney, Dr. Thomas Verney's first book called The Secrets of the Unborn Child. And so he had a vision back then as he was peering into the womb and beginning to have these conversations about the consciousness of our babies. And that's when the organization was born. And it's grown and grown now. And I am absolutely honored to be the education director for APA. And we have so many courses and beautiful things and offerings. I host a Monday live Zoom call every Monday that's open and free to anyone to attend. So if you're interested in learning more about APA, just come to our website at birthpsychology.com.
Thank you. And I'll share the link in the notes that go with this episode. And it's been, I mean, I've been referring to APA for many years, but the things that I intuitively find in practice or just that feel right, it's so good to have some research behind it to, it's just so nice to be like, oh, that's why this is so important. And it's not just a thing that I'm just suggesting that, if clients take more time out or relax more, or it just sounds, especially in a kind of modern world where women are often working till quite late into pregnancy or working really long hours or under a lot of stress, it's good to see the reason for actually having something different, and also how easy it can be to connect. Like, it doesn't have to be this bombardment of another thing you've got to do for yourself. It can be just like little ways that someone can connect with themselves and their baby.
That's right. You're so right on that. I often talk about how this is not new, even though I say, APA's only been around for 40 years. And we often talk about the pioneers in this field who somehow invented this, 40 years ago or so, in the 70s. But really, this wisdom and this knowledge has been around in other cultures for thousands and thousands of years. And we're just beginning to get peaks and awarenesses of it here in our Western culture. But what's wonderful about that is that now we do have scientists and researchers who are looking at that. And so these thousands of years of ancient world wisdoms, traditions can be validated with our Western mind and the science and the research. And then something else you said reminded me, I really would love to share that we do have a new yoga program. It's called Yoga for Motherhood at APA. And so, even if you are, that you find yourself being one of these, stressful, modern day mothers, something as simple as connecting through yoga, connecting to other women, connecting to yourself, connecting to your baby through just a weekly yoga program can be really beneficial.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone's interested in working with 4 baskets, are there things that they can do for themselves in their own kind of practices, or is it something that they would need to see you or anyone else who's working in this way?
No, it's totally a self journey. So I do have an e-course that's online, and I keep it very affordable because to me, this is a journey of self-awareness. And so the e-course is there just to help you on your journey of reflecting on what happened for you and your 4 baskets and how they're affecting your life. We all have so many positive and beautiful things that were in our 4 baskets. And so it's not necessarily just a big, heavy course where you're just going to go dig up trauma. But it really, I think it's helpful to start with, where's the beauty? Recognize how your life has been impacted with these beautiful events. And then it also has guideposts and tools for if you do uncover something that's a little less than ideal for you or that might have felt scary for you. There are tools and guideposts there to help you feel supported in that part of your journey. I'm not a therapist. I'm a midwife, a spiritual guide of some sort, but there's also resources there to help you find therapy and counseling if you need that. But it begins with the awareness and the self-reflective journey. Mm-hmm.
And is it possible to work with children with 4 baskets?
Absolutely. It's never too late to do this work, and it's never too early. I've often worked with infants, and I've worked with my own children at various stages with their 4 baskets. And so really simply, just to give you all some simple tools and some guidelines for how to talk if you're wanting to support children. First of all, I'm going to remind you, go back and journal about your 4 baskets before you talk to your children. It really, really, really will make a difference. It will help. But then once you've kind of either gone through the 4 baskets e-course or you've just done your own journaling and dream work on your primary period, and now let's look at, let's say, your child. So let me tell you a quick story about one of my children, and one of the experiences that we've had in the 4 baskets was, well, actually, I'm not going to tell you the whole story because it's in the presentation with Appa, and you can go and get it there. But quickly, just to let you know, it is so possible. And the way that you would do it is an open-hearted conversation. My children and I start calling them heart to hearts. And so we just, if there's an issue, because almost any and every issue can be traced back to the 4 baskets, I have discovered. And this is in every relationship. Of course, it's going to be your work first. That's why I always point people back to your own 4 baskets. But then let's say you're discovering that maybe a sleep problem or a potty problem or a relationship behavioral problem or a school problem, any number of these things that we might find in our children, we can be probably traced back to their 4 baskets time frame. And so we would just have a heart-to-heart, and usually our heart-to-hearts are on their bed. I would just kind of crawl up next to them and and I would just invite them, are you ready to have a heart-to-heart? And they get to say yes or no. The child's always in choice. And most often my children would say yes. And then the process is you tune into yourself and you feel as you connect to the other person. And these are tools that work in any relationship, anytime. It's called the art of listening. And you tune into yourself and what you're feeling. And then you reflect or resonate that back to that person. So as an example, let's say, your child is acting out. You give them their space to act out. When it feels appropriate, you can go and say, are you ready to have a heart-to-heart? You tune in with each other and then you reflect. And you might say something like, often I would say, I hear whatever it is that, I hear that you might be expressing this, whatever you feel like they're trying to express. And then I would reflect, I think this might be happening because of your, you don't have to even use the word first basket or second basket. You could say, from when mommy was really stressed out when I was pregnant with you. And I didn't listen to you. And then it's just the opening of a conversation. And this can be done at any age. This can be done with an infant who's crying out. What we might have called colic at some point is an infant whose needs aren't being met or were not met at some point, and they're trying to resolve that experience. And so with the infant, you could hold them and just say, oh my goodness, I hear that you're needing my attention, or I hear that you are upset. And your heart will guide you about what to say. And then if you're remembering an experience from their 4 baskets, then you can reflect that to them. I think this might be happening because of the way you were born. And the doctor took you away from mommy for a very short period of time or for a long period of time, whatever that might be. And let them have their experience. And then the way we resolve it. So there's a period of time where it's allowed, the feeling is allowed to be there. And everybody's hearing and resonating with the feeling. And then the resolution comes in by acknowledging it. And then if there's anything you can apologize for, the work I like to do is called ho'oponopono. It's a Hawaiian traditional forgiveness practice. And I lived in Hawaii for 5 years and incorporate this into this work. It's so magical and so easy. So the 4 steps of ho'oponopono are, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And I love you. And so from me and my children, this is the way that we would resolve any 4 baskets. I hope that wasn't too long-winded for you.
No, that was so many gems in there. And thank you for mentioning. I've never known how you actually pronounce the Hawaiian prayer, but I've used it in practice. And it's especially whenever there's a phrase that you stumble on and suddenly it can shift and so much can happen and release from it. So
it's the most important thing that I could tell anyone is just to be authentic. If we can all just, in these moments with ourselves and with other people, just slide into what's the most authentic for you in that time frame. So it's not a prescription that says, okay, now I'm supposed to say this and I'm supposed to say that. It's just be real with what you're feeling and resonating with what the other person's feeling. And the communication is the most important thing.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. And I'll obviously post all the links of the things that we've talked about so people can follow your work and contact you if they'd like to work with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing in the world.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please send me a comment on Twitter or Instagram @AvniTouch. Subscribe to Speak from the Body on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Go to avni-touch.com /podcast to get the show notes. And finally, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.